Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, It Pays to Modernize Your Existing Apps with Docker. A few housekeeping items before we get started. As a reminder, this session is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be sent out a few days after the webinar. We will take questions at the end, so please post them in the Q&A window, which is located in the lower right hand of your screen, and our speaker will address those questions at the end of the session. I would now like to introduce today's speaker, Nick Harvey, Senior Manager, Product Marketing Solutions at Docker. Nick, I will now turn things over to you.
Thank you so much. All right, guys, I'm really happy to be talking to you guys today. We're going to go over some pretty cool stuff, talk about some interesting things that are going on at Docker, mostly focused around, applications and specifically legacy applications. Before we do that, just a little bit about myself. Yeah, my name's Nick Harvey. I am working at Docker as the Senior Manager of Product Marketing Solutions, working on the app modernization program, which is called MTA. We'll get into that in a bit. Just if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can. It's at Nick S. Harvey. I do everything around, a lot of technology. But, you can also just, if you have any questions too, you can just also email me directly. It's pretty simple. It's just nick.harvey@docker.com. All right, to kind of kick things off. It seems like more and more I'm talking to a lot of customers and a lot of my colleagues out there about how they feel that their legacy applications are really, dictating not just their day-to-day, but where they're going towards the future, right? As an organization, as well as kind of personally, they feel as if because everything is being so focused and so driven and around those legacy applications that they're not able to get into that R&D as much as they'd like to. And so, they get kind of bogged down in it, but they feel, they're being put into this kind of channel to where they're not able to really look outside. It's just heads down, all focused on keeping those legacy applications up and running. And that makes sense, right? So when we talk to, when I talk to them more, it does, because these these applications, these legacy applications are often the ones that underline the business, right? They're the ones that generate revenue for the company. So it makes sense that a lot of time and focus is making sure that those applications are up at all times, right? Because any downtime or any, problem with that, is going to be catastrophic, right? At the very least, someone's going to get upset. So kind of what we're going to talk about today is how your legacy applications don't have to define your capabilities. You can still achieve all those goals and all of those objectives that we have with maintaining legacy applications, but you can bring modern behaviors to those applications without changing a single line of code. But first, what we need to do is really kind of talk about what's on this slide right here. Right, so if 80% of the IT budget, which is what we see on average, is spent towards maintenance and upkeep, that's a significant portion. And it's funny to see, when I see the statistic, it also kind of makes me go back and think about all those conversations out there in the marketplace around digital transformation, or there's just a lot of innovation talk out there. But especially when that comes down from the CIO into the organization, that messaging comes down pretty strong. But what I often, the people that I talk to are often seeing that there isn't a whole lot of resources that follow up with that, right? So they're asked to be doing more and, maybe with the same flat budget or even less, right? So, and then if those existing resources, 80% of that is being applied to legacy, it's very difficult to try to make some major advances or really get to things that you want to get to, right? And when you think about the compounding effects that has, that means that those applications that are out there, those that are now legacy or considered legacy, become stagnant. And the second you stop, really focusing on moving those applications forward, they start to get stagnant. And then, later on, and it's before you know it, and it happens over time, these applications become really complex due to a bunch of reasons that we're going to get into here in a second. And they become, either too difficult or too costly to fix or, move off of. And it just seems easier year after year to extend that contract to support that old application than it is to actually change it, right? That's the pain to change conversation that we often, hear or talk about. So again, you're kind of stuck into this loop. Okay, now we just got to focus on keeping the lights on. And it's not that you guys or any company is really falling behind. It's more just like struggling to keep up with these accelerating standards. So this is the loop that I find a lot of people in. I talk to a lot of people about, and the good news is we actually have a good route or a good solution for you. But let me go ahead and show you what one of our customers did, right? So we worked with MetLife. I'm pretty sure all you guys are familiar with MetLife, but if you're not and you're dialing in from somewhere outside the U.S., MetLife is a major insurance company, I think with somewhere of $70 billion in annual revenue, something major like that. Don't quote me on that number, but it's fairly large. And they really wanted to modernize one of their legacy Java applications that was running in their data center on-prem for a multitude of reasons, right? The ones that are kind of at the top are, costs, and they're in this interesting phase to where they're doing a lot of app modernization, which we'll talk about later in the deck. I actually have a really cool slide to talk about the other side of their story. But they wanted to figure out a way to achieve all these goals that they had set out, and they wanted, a big thing was not only did they want to reduce costs, but they wanted a common governance model. They wanted their legacy applications and their modern applications to be treated both as like first-class citizens on there and be managed the same exact way. As well as, they had a heavy focus on security, providing a self-service platform, and of course a standard deployment model. I think the standard deployment model also kind of ropes into that common governance model. But this is some of the before and after, right? So after MetLife worked with Docker, this is the kind of change that we're talking about, right? So we had, time from commit to deploy, how long it took for that code to go into production or into, a running application. And before, using Docker and a lot of the Docker solutions, it was around 7 days for that to happen. Once we kind of worked with them and implemented some of the Docker EE stuff, that went down to 5 minutes, right? So it's like 99% faster, or 99% faster. There was also a big focus on infrastructure utilization, right? Again, tying back to those TCO reduction costs that you can see on the left-hand side. Before, for this one application, right, just for this very specific application, it took 4 servers to run this application. And just after containerizing that application, just by bringing that application into the Docker EE ecosystem, the amount of resources were cut in half, right? Half, that's huge, right? Other big important things, right, tying directly back to MetLife's big priorities, there was, MTTR, mean time to resolution for security patches. That was 7 days before. You can see a pattern here of 7 days for a lot of their stuff. But afterwards, it was 2 hours, right? So that was a big deal. If things like if we go back to the days of Heartbleed and all these other things, having a vulnerable system, especially for a company like MetLife, that's a big deal. And so they were very excited to see, that 2-hour time frame afterwards. And they think they can get it a lot faster. They just have to implement some new policies. But that's an 84x decrease in that MTTR, which is just huge. And then, of course, another thing, too, that's big for them is an average time to scale. How, as peak load goes on, how do I scale up my application, but I don't, how do I scale it back down when that's over? And we'll actually get into that here in a bit with the MetLife, but think about MetLife when, there's open enrollment phases. So when you have that one time a year where you get to go in and change some of that stuff. Everyone's logging in it all at once. Now, previously MetLife would have to staff or build their data center for that peak capacity all the time. There wasn't a way to, they didn't really have a way to kind of, descale or downscale. So they just have this very, static approach to it, and it was just throwing hardware at it, and it took about 7 days. And then afterwards, right, with the Docker container, it takes about 5 minutes for those applications to scale, which is pretty cool too, right? So that's another 99% increase. Very, very interesting stuff here for MetLife. But what I'm here to talk to you guys about more is how do you change, right? So we know that the 80% is a big deal, or at least a majority of your budget is really connected to those legacy applications, and it's really hindering you towards really making a proactive step forward in some of the goals and initiatives that you have set. But the good thing is just like MetLife, you too can modernize your traditional applications using Docker, the Enterprise Edition, to get the portability, the security and efficiency that you want to see without changing a single line of the application code. And that sounds too good to be true, but I have a lot of examples of where that actually, we were able to do that. But that's how you're going to cut into that 80%, and that's going to give you enough time and enough resources, by plenty. You can see some of the gains that you saw with MetLife to fuel that next thing, right? So maybe you guys are looking at implementing a new type of technology. Maybe you're thinking about moving off of a SQL database into a NoSQL database, and what kind is that? Or a new monitoring solution, or just different things to make your business operate faster, more agile, whatever. There's a billion reasons, and there's a billion technologies to check out, right? And this is how we can help you guys do it. But the Docker EE platform in itself is really great at providing three major things, right? So we talk to a lot of customers, we work with a lot of them to help them kind of change their organizations and their technology stacks. But these are, when we consolidate all the benefits that we talk to them or that we realize with them, these are the big three, right? So on average, with most of our customers, efficiency gains just in terms of infrastructure, they see a 77% reduction in the amount of servers it takes to run that same application at that same workload as previously, right? And that's just due to the inherent nature of containers and how lean they are, and they just reduce the amount, the required resources to run all those applications, and the VM resources and the operating system within those VM resources is pretty much cut out, right? So it kind of cuts out the middleman. And these containers then are not only very efficient, but they're very portable. And this has compounding effects as well. It makes the application infrastructure independent, right? So you can deploy wherever you feel like needs to be deployed, wherever that application makes the best sense to be deployed. And that leads to the applications being deployed more frequently. You spend less time troubleshooting what happens between, dev and stage and prod, and you eliminate that. It worked on my machine. It must be a production issue. You eliminate that right there with just containerizing your application. It doesn't matter what the underlying infrastructure is. It could be completely different architecture altogether. It could be in a different cloud. It could be on-prem. But that application is going to run the same exact way no matter what, right? So you don't have to code your application for an AWS deployment and then recode it for an Azure deployment, right? If you containerize it, it's going to run the same way in both environments. And then security is another big inherent value add for containers, right? It isolates the resources and it isolates the application from the system as well as, so that you can run multiple containers in the same system and they have these clear lines of separation to where they can't really get out and kind of compromise the system. So that issue of, having multi-tenancy is kind of a big thing solved with containers. And a lot of our customers are seeing, just because of that and just the way that the Docker EE platform works, which I also have a slide here in a second about, it will, it does a lot around security and patching and making sure that those latest patches are deployed across your system and so that you're not left vulnerable or having to manually update every single machine. I'll show you how that works here in a bit, but it's very, very cool. And these are just a few of the numbers that we're getting from a lot of our customers. But let's level set really quickly, right? What is a legacy app really? A lot of the times when I ask this question to people, they immediately jump to, oh, it was code written back in the 80s or early 90s, or, depending on who you ask, some of the younger kids these days, oh, it's code written in the 2000s, right? And and it really is, while that is, a common behavior associated or common or commonality of a legacy application, there's actually a lot more to what I think they're termed as a legacy application. And so we're just going to kind of go over those really quickly, right? It can be an external application. It can be an internal application. But if your application kind of contains a lot of lost knowledge, that's another big indication that that is heading towards that phase that I was talking about in that first slide, to where that application becomes stagnant and it becomes very difficult to update. Because the people who wrote that code, may have left the company or moved on to a different project or, what have you, but they, whether they didn't document their code very well, because, that never happens, or, just there's a million reasons out there. If they're no longer tied to that project, they're the ones that have all that knowledge and they took it with them when they left, that's a big problem. That's going to have a major impact on your application and any future deployments, right? If most of your application uploads or most of your fixes or updates being rolled to your applications are Band-Aid fixes, that's also another big indication it's a legacy application. If you're not focusing on new features and it's mostly just patching small bugs or issues because patching new features is just not in the cards at this time for a number of different reasons. That's another common behavior of a legacy app. If dynamic scaling isn't possible, right? So we were just talking about MetLife not too long ago. That's a big indication that you're dealing with a legacy platform or a legacy application. If that application isn't able to scale up and down, that's a big need for a lot of enterprise customers today. And that's something that is, you can't compromise on, because that's what drives up costs a lot of the times. Because if you're paying for peak load all the time, you could be saving so much money throughout the rest of the year. But my personal favorite is that when maintenance windows are quarterly or a biannual event, that's another big indication, another common behavior with legacy applications. But my favorite part of just that, right, my favorite part of these quarterly or biannual events is when your maintenance windows really have more anxiety than they actually do confidence that things are going to come back online. That's a really common behavior for organizations dealing with, and that legacy application is really causing them a lot of trouble. So I can't tell you how many times I've talked to customers or folks where they take the maintenance windows down and they have all these like funny rituals and kind of superstitions to make sure that environment comes back up. But these are some of the big things that are commonly associated with legacy applications when you look at the bigger picture. But this is the thing, we can fix that. We can work with you to where this no longer really applies to your legacy application, right? And this is how we're going to do it, right? So our methodology, the secrets to all the goodness is just modernizing or containerizing the application and making it, taking it off of that existing infrastructure and really making it portable and just being, inherently, inheriting all the values of what containers offer for applications, right? So we start by taking that existing application, we convert it into a container running in the Docker EE platform, which provides a lot of functionality and a lot of features that IT organizations really want to see. And then we give them the ability to run on whatever modern infrastructure makes the best sense for them. We talk to customers who are on big cloud-first initiatives or on cloud migration initiatives where they want to have everything running in the cloud by 2020, or there are some customers who are just dipping their toe in the cloud. They really aren't there yet. And there's even more customers, and I think this is where, there are a lot of people out there that agree, is that it's all going to be hybrid, right? So it may sound great to run everything in a cloud, but some application workloads just don't go, they just aren't going to make it to the cloud for whatever reason. And so they want to be able to run things on-prem and off-prem kind of simultaneously. And so that containerization of that application makes that possible. Your developers can deploy on-prem and you can escalate to cloud if you want. There's just a million different ways that you can cut that or splice that up. But it's your application is not going to behave differently, and that's a big thing. And once we get past just this first three, right, that's going to cut massively into that 80% that's being consumed for those legacy applications. That's where we're going to switch from, the organization, or where you guys are going to switch from being mostly reactive focused, and now you're going to have a lot more room to breathe and become more proactive, right? And that's where you can start to tackle things like modern methodologies, where you bring in CI/CD more than what you may, some of you guys may be running it today. That's great, but a lot of legacy applications, working with CI/CDs, it's a bit of an issue, but you can focus and you can put work on that. And then as you're kind of building around these modern methodologies of CI/CD, DevOps, all this stuff, then you can actually start to, in parallel, while your legacy application is up and running, still generating revenue for the company, you can spend more time, or your developers can spend more time working and actually starting to carve that application out into modern microservices or mini services or faster moving monoliths. There's a lot of different words that you can use there. But basically, you can start to move towards that innovation side to where you're at, drastically changing that application. But you're not sacrificing downtime. You're not sacrificing, you can really focus on the customer experience or the human experience, if you will, with your application, as opposed to just trying to patch and Band-Aid fix everything. But this is what it looks like underneath the covers. It's pretty cool, right? So developers, whether they're working on microservices or traditional applications, right? Those legacy applications that we're talking about, the traditional and legacy kind of go hand in hand, or even something that you got from a third party, which is actually another indication, I think, of a legacy application. If you've acquired, whether it's through an acquirement within your company, maybe your organization acquired another company, or you purchased a piece of software from an ISV that's no longer in business. That's another common behavior with legacy applications. But what's great about Docker EE is that it treats all these applications are managed the same exact way. They follow the same exact workflow. And that is, once the application is developed, the Docker image is built, and then that's sent into the registry, and along the way it's signed to make sure that, any transit in between it's not messed with. It's security scanned to make sure that the image that's being injected in the registry is on the latest and greatest and latest patch and everything, and that just all gets put in the registry. And then on that, once that kind of hands it off to operations, and operations is kind of in control of promoting those applications to the different environments. Usually, right? If there's CI/CD, this can be automated to a degree, but IT operations is usually in charge of kind of keeping those production workloads running or promoting the app in general. And they can then promote that application through the user control plane or through the many other services that we have, and they can deploy those applications to those different environments. And so you can see how earlier when I was talking about MetLife, because this is what it looks like after we worked with MetLife, this is what they, this is the kind of process and flow that they work on. You can see how when things went from 7 days to five minutes or even less, that's how that was happening, because a lot of these steps in between are using a lot of the automation and a lot of the features added by the Docker EE platform, taking the developers and the operation guys out of the weeds, right? Now, instead of focusing on the one tree, now they're kind of looking at things as from a forest perspective, or out of the weeds into the garden, however you want to, whatever saying you use. But this is, so why Docker, right? This is, containers may not be a new terminology for you. Containers may be something that you've heard a lot about. But, one of the things that, a lot of other container platforms do is that they're very, they say there's no lock-in, or they say that there's no, they run anywhere, the same kind of, you might hear some of the messaging, similar messaging, but it's not exactly true. And in fact, a lot of it is just blatant, kind of not talking about the things that they can't do. And Docker is the only credible way to run on, any application workload across any infrastructure, and give your applications that common governance model and, them all kind of work in the same exact way, right? And that's across Linux, that's across Windows, that's mainframe, that's any cloud, right? It's for microservice applications, that's for traditional homegrown applications and ISV, right? Docker's the only one. So where other cloud providers other container platforms really only work in the public cloud or really only work on Linux. There's no one today other than Docker that covers the entire spread, right? So if this is something you guys are working on, and I don't know of a single IT shop ever that doesn't have at least some combination of Linux and Windows. If you're pure one shop, I'd love to hear from you, because I've been in the industry for I think a little over 10 years now. And I've never met I've talked to hundreds and maybe even thousands of customers. I've never heard of someone being pure one shop or the other. There's always at least somewhat small environment. So I'd love to hear. Anyways, moving on. So I talked about MetLife earlier. This is kind of the bigger picture at MetLife. So what you saw was, a smaller side of MetLife, or a very specific use case within MetLife, I think is a better way to put it. But MetLife was on another bigger initiative, right? And they had some big problems to solve. And basically what they were seeing is that, a lot of their code that was written in the 1980s was really limiting them and their ability to provide value to their customers, right? So customers really wanted to access a lot of the services that MetLife provides through different mediums, right? Whether they access it on their phone through an app, or whether they do fill out quotes through Facebook. There was, or a big one I think I read or kind of worked with them or talked to them about, is taking the Fitbit and being able to apply that so that they can get a discount on their health insurance, right? All these kind of newer platforms that were recently introduced can't really integrate with that code that was written in the 1980s. And so they had some big issues, right? They really saw the need to modernize their applications, but they needed to figure out a way to do it that didn't cost their business, that didn't cause them to lose customers today, right? And so they had some big hurdles to overcome. That is, they needed to run, they needed this old code running on mainframe, and it made it very difficult for them to integrate with newer requests by their customers, right? Some of those things I just talked about. And they needed cloud scalability for those legacy applications because, again, MetLife, they have an open enrollment period to where for a few months everyone's able to log in and change their insurance levels, and that's a ton of load for them. But that's their peak time of year, and so to fill out a data center and run it the other 9-10 months out of the year, that's a lot of money that was kind of sitting on or being spent. But we were able to help them tremendously with a lot of these objectives, right? With modernizing their applications, building things to be more microservice oriented, and allowing them to free themselves up so that they can innovate and focus on their customers, right? So we were able to help them shrink the application delivery from months to minutes. For a lot of their applications, they were able to move workloads from data centers and into the cloud, right, off of mainframe into the cloud. It was a big deal. And improve their computing resource usage efficiently by a factor of 20. Right, that's huge, factor of 20. Imagine you being the one going to your boss or your CIO or whoever and saying, hey, through this effort, I just increased our usage or our efficiency by 20. Factor of 20, that's huge, right? And that's pretty common. I mean, these are numbers that we're seeing repeated consistently across a lot of our customers. So it's really, that's something that you guys can absolutely take advantage of. But I really like this quote by Aaron, right? He said that a hybrid cloud, the hybrid cloud environment that we have with Microsoft and Docker has been one of the most important aspects of our strategy that we've done in the last 35 years, right? If you think of MetLife and you think of how long they've been around, right? I think it's $70 billion in annual revenue, and you think about how long this company's been around, and they've been around for a very long time, right? They have code from the 1980s, so that gives you an indication. But that's the big, the hybrid cloud environment they have with Microsoft and Docker EE has been one of the most important aspects of their strategy in the last 35 years. I mean, that's something I get a little proud of, right? That's pretty awesome. And we're going to be publishing more on MetLife here soon, so stay tuned for that. You'll be able to read their full case study here very soon. But what I talked about earlier about you guys being able to take advantage of a lot of this stuff. And so what we have is a program called, the MTA program. And earlier, that diagram that I showed you where you can cut into that 80% and the quickest way to do that, well, what we have is a 30-day engagement to where Docker and a partner will go on site to your place of business, roll up our sleeves, we'll all roll up our sleeves, we'll all work together and modernize that legacy application without touching a single line of code, right? So this can happen, and and no one, developers wouldn't even be the wiser, right? We could modernize that application, throw it in the container, and see it running and without it disrupting anything, right? And a lot of that work, or really what's included with that, is that so for 1 week, we'll be on site, rolling up our sleeves, going through the whole gamut with you guys. It's a lot of knowledge transfer as well as like hands-on work. And then there's 3 weeks remote where we'll support you and kind of work with you kind of remotely. And that's a good ideal time for a lot of our customers. We'll deploy Docker EE on standalone Azure, or we have another couple offerings in the next slide I'll show you guys about. But we have a cloud option like Azure, and we have some data center driven approaches as well. We'll containerize one application to start with, but you can absolutely expand that more. In fact, a lot of our customers are. I think a very significant portion of them are opting to, once they've gone through the MTA program, where we started with one, they're looking at bringing in, much more, if not hundreds of more. And we'll kind of get that legacy application, right? Those things off of Windows Server 2003, and do an end-to-end deployment on using Docker EE on modern infrastructure, which is really cool to see, right? And then of course, we'll kind of show you guys all the roads for Docker EE as well. But so that's kind of what's included in that program, and that's going to get you guys to that, to cut into that 80%. And again, just imagine being that guy, being able to go to your boss, or that guy or girl going to your boss and saying, hey, in just a few weeks, we cut our utilization by a factor of 20, or we cut our server costs by 50%, just with this initiative. But what a lot of people, what we realize and see is just what happens in the first 7 days. So that's 30 days, but what happens in the first 7 days? A majority of basically everything you see here, those three icons, most of that happens in this first 7 days, right? And then the best thing, I think the coolest thing that come out of this is not only the application itself, it's fully rigged for Compose, or Docker Compose, like it's fully integrated into the Docker EE environment. But the best thing I think that comes out of this, and maybe I'm a little bit biased, but there's this performance review. And basically what we do is we do a before, and we kind of capture some, statistics around how your application behaves before going into this, and then we take a look at what it looks like afterwards. And just right there on site during those 5 days, we get to see and show you, and that way you get to walk away not just with an application that changes and behaves completely differently, but we also have, now you have like some really good solid data to tie to that you can use to really see and measure the impact of what this looks like at scale. A lot of companies, a lot of customers I've worked with in the past have tried different technologies, and they get this little POC working, but there's very little to connect that to, because the very next question is, okay, this POC worked, how do I run it at scale? What is it going to be like at scale? With this approach, with our MTA program, we're able to, kind of walk away. You're able to walk away with a, solid piece of data and really kind of tie that in. So when you start asking yourself, what does it look like at scale? Well, you have all the facts and figures that you need to figure out what that impact's going to be. So like I said, we have a few different offerings here, and so that we kind of cover any approach or any use case, right? So, and like I said, in just a few days, we can transform your Windows or Linux applications to run as a container in the Docker EE platform, and you get all those benefits around efficiency, portability, and security, and all without touching a single line of code. I cannot stress that enough because it's a big deal. We have a cloud offering, right, where if you're interested in doing Azure, this is Microsoft and Avanade joint partnership. We have some other data center-driven approaches too, right, for the people that are really focusing on on-prem. And right now we have Cisco as well as HP options there. But you can find out a lot more info here, like the Docker MTA stuff. But this is really, you can get to pick your adventure, right? And some customers can even, talk about mixing some of these together. But if you're interested, right, if this is something that you see has a lot of potential value for you moving forward, this is what we got to do, right? These are the steps. It's really simple, right? Get in touch with us, and what we're going to do is we're going to get together, and we're going to try to understand your business objectives, what you guys are focused on. A lot of like the same things that you saw with our MetLife story a little bit earlier. We want to understand what you're trying to ultimately achieve, and then we will help figure out how to get there and what your expectations are. What are the expectations of your management chain, right? And see how we can guide things to work and fulfill those objectives. Then the next thing we'll do, really, after we have a really good grasp on what those business objectives are, then we can start to identify an application. What application can we use, or what application can we do that fulfills a lot of those objectives, that that allows you to prove out a lot of these theories or hypothesis of how things are going to change. And we'll work with you on that, as well as scope out resources, right? We want to figure out where this is going to run, if it's going to run on-prem or off-prem, or who's going to be involved from your side, as well as who's going to be involved on our side. But we get to really kind of do some more logistics around resources. But then after that, right? And this can all happen in the same meeting, by the way, like in the same hour meeting. You can knock a lot of this stuff out. After that, it's really simple. You just pick a start date, and that's when we'll kind of show up and roll up our sleeves and get to work. Yeah, but this is, so I really want to keep this presentation brief because it's a really simple program. It's got a ton of value, very little risk, because again, you're not just being given tools and then saying, good luck, call us if you have any trouble. This is a very active engagement where, again, we'll come spend time with you guys on site for a week. Some of those programs have funding. So, if you think that that's a barrier to, for you guys, talk to one of the Docker reps, or talk to, your Microsoft rep, or some of the other ones. We can, there's a lot of these things can be funded. It's per program, so it's not across the board, but just, we can explore that option with you guys. But there's just a ton of value, very little risk, and it's just a tremendous program that we have that we're just getting ramped up on as well. So we're excited to talk to people about it, excited to see what they have to say. But what I'm going to do right now is just kind of go through some of these questions. I see a few. Jeremy asks, what was the MetLife app modified, or just moved over to the Docker EE to get the benefits? So yeah, so basically, again, we really focus on not, one of the major benefits of this program is that we don't have to alter the code. We literally take that application, the legacy application, and the way the container works is it packages all the application components, all the libraries it needs to run in a standardized format. And that's what is called a container or container image. Once that container image is running or deployed, that is what's called, it's commonly referred to as a container. But that is, so what we did for the MetLife folks is we just kind of containerized that legacy application. We didn't have to edit any of the Java code. We didn't have to do anything on that regard. And we containerized it. We used there's a lot of tools and services that are included. I'm glad you bring this up because we have tools like things like image to Docker, where it'll take a virtual machine image, and for other applications, for Java, for .NET, we have, I think a lot of our .NET stuff is handled by image to Docker, where it'll take a virtual machine image, and then, once you run it through the image to Docker, it'll take that virtual machine image and convert it to a container, stripping out all the OS components, but keeping all the application components. So for MetLife, to answer your question simply, Jerry, is we really just focused on containerizing the application and not changing the code. So another question we have here is, how would Docker EE convert to a container? Do we have to do, I think, so he's wondering if they have to do the build images or would be done by Docker EE. So I think, so the Docker images can be built by the developer, can be built by, whoever's going to be packaging up that application. There's different practices for different teams. So Docker EE is the software. I just want to make sure that I'm not going to, that's not being confused. Docker EE isn't a services team that will build your images for you. It is, they will, you can do Docker builds, but you can also automate the builds of your applications as well using some of the features of the Docker EE program or Docker EE platform. Another question I have is, so how do we compare Docker with AWS, Lambda? So those are different things. It's was it apples and oranges, but you can still compare fruit. The difference is really, one's, container, Lambda is, I believe, the serverless architecture. So those are different items, but I may have them confused. AWS services are all over the place. But Docker is, again, the only platform that's going to run on-prem, off-prem. That's something AWS can't really do. You can use AWS, the Docker stuff for public cloud, but because you're still running Docker, right? It's still the Docker EE engine. But if you're doing any on-prem work whatsoever, you're going to have to find something else, right? So Docker is a good solution there. How long will the MTA program be running for? Right now, there is no end date. So it's something, these aren't like a limited, this isn't a limited time offering. This is an initiative that we're very focused on and very, very excited about here at Docker. So if you're interested, don't worry about, get on board as soon as you can, absolutely, but there's no really end date in mind or in sight as of yet. Is there a cost associated with the MTA program? That's a good question. So it depends really on your use case and kind of the route that you want to go. But either way, yeah, there is going to be some cost, but it's very, very small, right? So usually it's just to cover the resources. I think the majority of the cost. So there's the Docker EE components and the platform itself is actually part of, it's part, when I say funded, it's kind of offered, it's not charged immediately out of that. And then it's also like the services that it provides, some of the professional services that we use with partners. Because again, the MTA program is all, it's the Docker EE platform tools and things like that, but it's also a partnership, right? That's the other big thing to keep in mind. It's a very symbiotic relationship between partners, Docker, and you, the customer, right? And so it's a more heads or better than one kind of approach, but really that plays to the, it's really important because when we work with folks like, say, Accenture and Avanade, or I'm sorry, Avanade and Microsoft, which Accenture owns Avanade, but Avanade, they have a lot of really good industry experience around, cloud deployments and hybrid cloud deployments and through all aspects, right? Through development and all the practices around Agile. They just have this, entire, continent view of what IT is and how it functions, especially around Microsoft architecture. So they have a lot of experience with that, a lot of, experience helping customers build or change or modernize or, however. So bringing in experts like that to talk about and kind of be there and help modernize that application when we're there containerizing it as well, that's you're the one that benefits from that, right? All that knowledge gets passed on to you. It's implemented as we architect this stuff out. You're bringing in that industry knowledge as well. And so those services are, that's part of this MTA engagement. So, to answer your question, Jeremy, the cost, there is some cost, but it's very, very minor. And I'm not joking there, but yeah, there's some funding stuff as well. But, we just reach out to your Docker sales rep or reach out to me. Like I said, my email is at nick.harvey@docker.com, and we'll make sure that you guys get put in the right place, but we can talk about that for sure. And there's some other questions in here. If I didn't answer your question, I'm just a big fan of not trying to fake answer. If I don't know, I just don't know, but I will find out, right? I'm a big fan of finding out the answer to this question, and I do know some of the answer, but I don't know all of it, and I really don't want to talk, I really don't want to answer something unless I'm confident about it. So, in other words, if you didn't hear your question get answered, that's because I'm going to go find out, and then I'll reach out to you and answer it with 100% confidence. But I think that's all the questions.
Yep, I think that. Yep, thanks, Nick. I think that was all the questions that you hit on. Again, it sounds like if your question wasn't addressed, Nick will reach out to you later and get the information to you. Again, a reminder that the session was recorded, and we will send out a copy of that recording to everyone who attended in the next few days. Otherwise, this does conclude our webinar. Also wanted to make a mention, though, to please be sure to register for upcoming Docker webinars at docker.com/webinars. And be sure to check out our events at docker.com/events for customer-facing webinars and events. We thank you again for joining us and hope you all have a great day.